You are 2 years old when your sister is born. Your father lifts you onto his shoulders so you can see her through the crowd of midwives, and she is small and red and furious at the light. She is named Korra. In the square the next morning, your father tells the fishermen, and someone lights a fire in celebration. You watch from the railing at your mother's side, already aware in the way that very young children are aware that something about today is different from yesterday. She walks at 9 months. At 1.5 years, she runs across the central square and destroys a rack of drying fish. By 3, she ambushes the older boys with snowballs from behind the storage igloo until one of them decides it isn't funny, and then she throws harder. You watch all of it from whatever vantage lets you see her without being seen, a habit you develop young and never lose. She's 4 years old on the day it happens. The central square, midwinter, your father arguing with 2 White Lotus masters near the gate. Korra pulls a stream of water from the rain barrel by her fingertips. She cracks the frozen ground with a single fist. She takes the flame from a torch and holds it above her palm. 3 elements at 4 years old. The White Lotus masters look at each other with the expression of people confirming something they already believed. 6 weeks later, the compound walls go up. Stone, heavy gate, guards who nod at you politely and do not step aside. On the first day, you walk to the gate and one of them tells you, visiting hours are Saturday. You walk home along the shore path, and the village looks exactly the same as it did that morning. That is the strangest part of all of it. Nothing visible has changed, and everything has. You can see the compound from your bedroom window. The guards change at 6 every morning. Your mother leaves the house daily with a cloth bag, seal stew, dried berries, the blue cakes Korra likes, and the guards let her through without a word. On Saturdays you go too, and Korra runs at you at full speed when she sees you, dirty from practice, grinning in a way that tells you the training is hard and she would not trade it. You learn to read her in these visits the way you learn to read weather, not from what she says, but from how she stands. You are 8 years old when you go to the south shore below the docks and spend 45 minutes trying to pull water up from the sea. Nothing moves. You come back the next day to a different stretch of shore and try again. 2 weeks of this and you have a clear picture of who you are, not a bender. You say it to yourself on the walk home, not as a wound, more like a measurement. You need to know what is actually there before you can decide what to do with it. Your father's at the dock when you come up the path. He watches you approach without asking where you were. That silence is its own kind of answer, and you are 8 years old and already understand that. The compound gains a new resident when Korra is 9, a polar bear dog puppy, delivered in a crate on a White Lotus sled. Through the gate that Saturday, you watch Korra name her Naga before anyone has unloaded the crate. By the end of the visit, Naga is sitting on Korra's feet while the masters wait for the session to resume. On the shore path home, your mother asks how Korra seemed. You say, happy. She nods and hangs the empty cloth bag on its hook by the door. Neither of you says what happy costs in a place you cannot leave. Katara lives in a house full of things that have outlasted the people who gave them to her. She opens the door when you knock, looks at you for 3 seconds and says, come in. You are 10. She puts a fisherman with a broken hand in front of you and stands at the back wall and watches without comment. 20 minutes in, she says, you felt where it hurt before you asked him. That is the difficult half. She takes a scroll from the shelf above the window and tells you to read it before next week. Her teaching room has maps pinned to every wall and one chair that is always hers. She mentions Aang while you practice on a girl with a sprained wrist, not as a name from a history scroll, but as fact. The way you mention someone you ate meals with for decades. She does not explain this. You do not ask her to. You understand that the weight of certain names is something she has learned to carry without drama, and that learning to do the same is part of what she is teaching you. You are 13 when you set a dislocated shoulder in the village treatment room without being told the sequence. The man breathes out and says, thank you. Katara is in the doorway with her arms folded and says nothing. At the next lesson, she puts the advanced scrolls on the table without explanation. Your father appears in the treatment room one afternoon while you are managing a child with fever. He stands in the doorway for 10 minutes and watches your hands. Then he walks back to the docks without speaking. You have the thought on the path home that he does not know what category to put you in, and that this is neither your problem to solve nor his fault. On the shore path, you pass the compound gate. The guard nods. You nod back. You do not stop. Korra is 17 when she breaks out through a drainage tunnel below the compound wall in the middle of the night. with naga and no message left for anyone. Your father spends 3 days at the compound gate arguing retrieval protocols with White Lotus masters who have nothing to retrieve. Your mother sits at the kitchen table each morning with food she does not eat. You walk out to the drainage tunnel on the second day and crouch at the opening and think about how long she must have been loosening that section of wall, moving a little soil at a time. On nights when no one would think to check. Years, probably. Some of this patience you recognize. 2 weeks later, you pack your healer's kit, walk to the dock, and tell your mother you will write. You have known for some time that if Korra was going to leave, you were going to follow at a reasonable distance. The supply ship takes 4 days north. Republic City comes in as a wall of electric light across the water. You stand at the bow and look at the towers and the radio antennas and the pro-bending arena lit over the harbor and think, she is in there somewhere. You find a room above a noodle shop in the merchant quarter, 12 wans a week, thin walls, alley-facing window. The next morning, you register at the city medical board. The clerk mentions a shortage of water tribe healers and hands you intake forms, and you start on the first day. The ferry to Air Temple Island takes 10 minutes. You knock on the main gate. Korra opens it, stares at you, and says nothing for a full 5 seconds. You say, "I'm not here to take you home." She steps aside and lets you through. In the merchant quarter, a non-bending shopkeeper shows you the paperwork for a council tax that went up the same week. Bending business licenses went down. You look at the numbers and start doing the counting you should have done 2 months earlier. At the docks, a freight worker shows you the scar on his forearm from a firebender collector who came 2 days late. He describes it the way people describe things they have decided they cannot change. You go to an Equalist rally in the warehouse district on a Tuesday night without telling Korra. 300 people in the dark, a masked figure on a raised platform. The speech is precise. The crowd is quiet. Then, Amon takes a triple threat triad firebenders bending at the close of it, brings the man up on stage, strips him where everyone can see. The man is silent afterward in a way that is different from unconscious. The crowd does not cheer. That silence is what stays with you on the walk home, not the removal, which was staged. 300 people who watched something permanent happen and made no sound. That is not bloodlust. That is exhaustion. And exhaustion in a crowd that size is a different problem than anger. 1 police officer for every 4 you counted in the bending districts. At breakfast on the island, Korra asks where you were. You say, out. She has trained on this island for months and has not been to the East Quarter once. You do not tell her to go. You think about what she would do with the silence in that warehouse, what she would say to 300 people who are tired and right about the grievance and wrong about who to blame for it. And you decide it is not the right week for that conversation. The attack on the pro-bending arena plays out over the radio on a night in late spring. Amon's voice. The crowd sounds shifting, the emergency tone. The wolf bats are stripped of their bending on a public stage. Amon announces the revolution has begun. You think about the warehouse 6 weeks ago and the 300 people who did not cheer. This declaration is for a different audience entirely. The weeks after, Tarlok's task force rounds up non-benders after curfew. The clinic fills with people hit by chai blockers and metal benders who cannot say afterward which side it came from. Then, the Equalists take the city. In the fighting, Amon takes Korra's bending, all 4 elements, including the air that always came late. You hear it from Mako at the clinic door, his voice with no inflection in it. You borrow a rowboat and row north along the island shoreline in the dark. She is at the cliff edge, feet over the drop, looking at the harbor lights. You sit down beside her. She says, "Who am I if I can't bend?" You have been thinking about this question since the rally, since 300 people were quiet because they had an answer and nobody was asking them. You say, the same person who was going to break out of that compound with or without the Avatar title. And we both know it. Below the cliff, the water moves against the rocks. You hear the rest 2 days later. Airbending in a crisis moment. Amon exposed as a bloodbender. Tarlok and his brother gone on a boat in the harbor. Aang restoring what was taken. The Equalist argument was not wrong about the grievance, only about the solution. That is a different problem, and Korra is going to carry it. She gave back what others had lost. You finish wrapping a patient's wrist before you let yourself breathe. You go home the following winter when Unalak's ships appear in the southern harbor before dawn. By the time you reach the dock, the market district is occupied. Your father stands in the central square and argues with Unalak directly, the two of them in the cold without coats. The soldiers arrest Tonrak by midday and walk him to one of the ships. Your mother stands in the house doorway and watches them go and does not call out. You are at the back of the square with your healer's kit and no way to use it for what is happening. Korra fights in the southern sea. From the shore you watch waterspouts the size of fishing boats rise and collapse a kilometer out. This is different from the warehouse in Amon. These are her family's warships doing the arresting, and the man giving orders was supposed to be someone she trusted. The category of enemy is more complicated now. 3 weeks later, Korra is at the kitchen table, eating, answering questions. Then she stands at the window and tells you she has lost the past avatars. Unalak killed them inside her, every avatar going back to the beginning, including Aang. She says it without drama, and that is what makes it land. You heat water. She keeps talking from the window, what those thousands of years of accumulated memory weighted every decision against, what she carries now, without any of it. You set the tea on the sill and stay at the counter and let her run out of words. She falls asleep at the table later. You put your coat over her shoulders and go outside. At the compound gate, you stop. The gate was built for an avatar who needed the past avatars. All of that is gone now, and the walls are still there. You think, Katara lost Aang 30 years ago and kept teaching. That's a different problem than the one you came here to solve. Then, you walk home. The Red Lotus takes her in the mountains above the Earth Kingdom capital. You are in Republic City when Mako calls. His voice has no inflection, which is how you know it is serious before he says the words. You take the next airship south and land at a temple outside the capital in the dark. Katara is already in the treatment room, already working. Korra is in a wheelchair by the window, hands in her lap, eyes on the floor. You have seen her in many states since she was 4 years old, pulling flame from a torch. And this is the first time she looks like someone who has considered the option of not continuing. Katara says the metal poison is mostly out. You ask what mostly means. She does not answer, which is its own answer. You work alongside Katara in the mornings, the two of you on either side of the wheelchair. The platinum moved through her in ways that follow no clean map. In the afternoons, you take Korra out to the terrace above the temple garden. You play cards. You do not push her to talk. Once she cries for 40 minutes, and you stay in the chair beside her and say nothing, because there is nothing useful to say, and you have learned over the years to tell the difference between presence and noise. In the second month, she crosses the terrace on her own. Short, shaky, furious at the shakiness. She makes it to the far railing and stands there looking at the valley below with the expression of someone doing arithmetic on how much is left. You watch from the doorway. In the third month, she asks to be alone somewhere. She says it at the railing, not looking at you. You step back to the doorway and say, okay. She turns and checks your face for argument. You say, right when you land somewhere. She nods. 2 days later, her room is empty. In the clinic waiting room, you write letters. Every city with a water tribe quarter, every port with southern ships in dock. Mako searches through official channels and finds nothing. Asami runs freight records for 3 shipping companies and finds nothing. You call your mother from the post office on the corner every 2 weeks. On the bad weeks, you stand outside after hanging up and look at the street for a while before going back in. You run the clinic through all of it. Dock workers, factory laborers, people who pay what they can and sometimes cannot. The medical board gives you a Wednesday rotation at the city hospital. You keep the letters going. Nothing comes back. In the spring of the 3rd year, a merchant from the Earth Kingdom sits in the clinic chair while you wrap his wrist and mentions underground tournaments in Ba Sing Se's outer ring. Illegal bouts. Fighters with no real names, a circuit that runs out of warehouses in the lower city. He mentions a waterbender who has won 11 straight matches and does not speak to anyone after. You finish the rap, see him out, and book passage on the overnight ferry to Ba Sing Se. The outer ring warehouse is torchlit, sawdust on stone, 300 people on wooden benches. You find a seat in the back row. 20 minutes later, Korra walks out on the floor in plain clothes with her hair down. She fights like someone who needs to feel something land. She wins in 4 minutes. You move to the side exit before the crowd stands. She comes through and sees you and stops. She looks worse than after the poison in a way that has nothing to do with her body. You say, I'm not here to take you home. She sits down against the warehouse wall outside. You sit next to her. The crowd filters past and nobody stops. Kuvira's Colossus walks into Republic City Harbor on a morning in late spring. You're at the clinic window when the floor shakes and keeps shaking. 60 meters of metal moving through the bay, spirit vine cannon on one arm. You move the patients from the waiting room toward the north gate. 3 cannot walk under their own power. You stay for those 3. Korra fights Kuvira in the city center. You hear the impacts through the clinic walls between treating a fractured wrist and a woman cut by falling debris. You do not track the battle in real time. You track what arrives at the door. 2 hours after the Colossus falls, you find Korra at the Spirit Wilds portal, sitting in the rubble with Kuvira, both alive. You do not ask what was said in there. The clinic runs through 3 months of rebuilding. The medical board gives you a permanent license and a better room on the corner. Your mother comes in the fall, walks 1 block through the lower district, and cries. Then she puts on her coat and treats patients beside you for a week without being asked. Korra walks into the clinic on a Tuesday in autumn and sits in the patient chair. She's quiet for a moment and then starts talking. The past avatars. The 3 years she spent not being able to bend without the darkness arriving with it, what Zahir said in his cell. You listen from the counter. When she finishes, you say, "You're still the most dangerous person I know." She says, "I know, but not the way I thought I was when I was 4. You say, "No, that one took everything it took." She laughs, short, real. You hand her the tea. She takes it and looks out the window at the lower district street, and neither of you says anything for a while. Subscribe, because what comes next is different, and she is not done yet.